let's kick off, if I can, Nick. I mean, we want to ask you about lots of things about the commercial side of the sport. We're typically just talking all the time about tenths of a second and number of laps covered and deployment and tires and all this other nonsense. But basically, what pays for it all is what people like yourself do on the commercial side of the team. But it's easy for the race team to have an objective, which is lap time and race wins and points. What's the beginning of each season? What's the objective that you've set yourself or that the team sets you?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is an element of driving commercial revenue because Formula One is an expensive sport. It always has been, it always will be, and it's an expensive sport to compete in for the individuals and also for the team. Our target as a commercial team is first and foremost to be the first fully financially sustainable team within Formula One, meaning that the efforts of the entire marketing team bring in enough revenue to cover all of the F1 costs. And we're almost there. It's an achievable target for all of us. Just to give you an example of what that looks like in context, last year we generated more inbound sponsorship than any other sports team in the world. It was netting more than $150 million in that year. So, things are good. Things are good for the team. We're a very popular team, and we're seeing the sort of the benefits of Formula One explode, of course, around the world. Equally so, licensing royalties will soon become $30 million a year as well, and that's up 350% or so in the last 3 years. So things are growing, but I think in context, it's important to say that actually it's more about the right brands. It's not just about keeping the till ticking over and keeping the lights on in the business. That's incredibly important, but it's the right brands that we work with. So again, just to give you a few examples of the partners who we have as a team, we chose Oracle because their technology allowed us to do things that we couldn't do previously. We've got one of the most sophisticated fan loyalty programs in all sport at the moment, and they help us go faster on the track. We chose Cash App because Cash App have 40 million customers in the US in underserviced, underrepresented communities who perhaps never have access to Formula One. And the US, of course, is a target market for us. And then you've got companies like Hard Rock as well. They have 300 resorts around the world. We want to have watch parties with them to generate more fandom in untapped markets. So it really is about, commercial, of course. That is the core principle of what we do as a team. But it's about choosing the right commercial partners there as well. There's a real value exchange between the two organizations. And I think that's probably why we have the lowest churn rate, so we have the least partners leaving us out of all teams in the sport. We're never going to be a team that has sort of, 60 logos shotgunned against a media board. That's not our style at all. We want to keep a very valuable community of partners.
And you've mentioned that you've had a lot of success over the last 2 or 3 years, which seems to mirror or be parallel with the success on track. Is that right? Is success on track critical for bringing in partners?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Of course, on-track performance does matter. I think from our context, there's a phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats, and the explosion of Formula One has helped us enormously. However, on-track performance correlates and always will do in all sports to the off-track performance as well. However, I think it's really important just to, again, sort of contextualize that. Whilst the success of the team on the track can ebb and flow, it's about what we do when times are slightly leaner, slightly harder, and how we can continue and create that loyalty amongst our fan base when perhaps we're not winning, we're not coming first, we're not on the podium. So it's about what we do in that context. And what we're looking to do specifically there is we're expanding our own loyalty program, for example. So we have an exclusive loyalty program that creates those sort of evergreen moments. So even when things are hard on the track, regardless of results, we are able to engage fans in a really deep and meaningful way.
And if I just going back a step, when we look at teams at the sort of lower end of the grid, we can imagine that if the commercial director there can bring in another $5 or $10 million, that's going to translate directly to speed on track. There's a perception that a team like Red Bull, like Mercedes, like Ferrari, doesn't need sponsorship revenue, that they've got plenty of money already. Is that accurate, or are you under pressure to deliver increased revenue?
Yeah, of course, we're always under pressure to to drive the revenue of the team. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just necessarily about the revenue. We actually value our partners hugely and what they can give to us. One of the examples is looking at next year for our apparel side of things. We've brought in 5 brands who are each leaders within their separate industries, and that's not because of the commercial rationale behind it. It's because we have 5 separate brands who are specialists who are going to help us market our brand in new territories. And also, I think the other thing, sorry to mention, is that that helps us. What we do best. What we do best is we transcend the sport. We're the only genuinely relevant team who can sort of operate in the areas of and the verticals of music, art, culture, fashion, lifestyle. But we rely on those brands to help us do that. So there is a commercial piece there, of course, and there always will be a commercial piece. But actually, the brands who we partner with add so much more value beyond that.
So if you look at the spectrum, you look at the portfolio of brands that are with your team right now, how many knocked on your door and how many doors did you have to knock on, a kind of percentage split?
It's a very good question. It's difficult to say. It's difficult to sort of, I guess, remember all the sort of engagements that you have with these different brands. I'd say it's roughly 50-50 on us knocking on doors versus the other way around. And it's also probably worth mentioning that these engagements, they last for a year or so before we've actually brought a brand in. It's not a quick engagement where you take something off the shelf and provide that to the brand. These are very much bespoke engagements. We look very deeply into what the brand wants to achieve, what their objectives are, their strategy, how they're going to be measured, their KPIs, and of course, who those people that they're going to report to on those findings are. So we want to ensure that we're providing a strong return on investment for the brands. And that's a long process, and when you look at large companies like Oracle, there's multiple layers that they have to go through to seek permission for a large investment like a title sponsorship of a Formula One team. So it's a long process, but I'd say, in answer to your original question, it's probably 50-50 or so.
When people watch you on TV, they see a logo on the side of a racing car. That's the obvious part of sponsorship. But is that what you're selling to brands, or is there more?
No, there's much more than that. I think that's, when I first entered the sponsorship industry 20 or so years ago, we used to talk about how dated it was just to have a logo on an asset. And that's still very much the same now. And we're evolving, and we're quickly evolving into other areas. So there's a multitude of layers, and I could talk all day about this. This is something that I've become quite nerdy about myself. There's a multitude of layers which we look at, and it's based on what the brand wants. Are they consumer focused? Are they business focused? On a very sort of unsophisticated level, and if I was going to be stuck in a lift with someone, I had 10 seconds to explain exactly what we're selling. We're quite simply the number one team in the world's number one hottest sport, delivering the number one media exposure levels for our partners. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But I could go on to another level as well. And, if I sort of took you through the next level of that, we have our own Formula One track. We've got the most in-demand hospitality in the paddock, as you can imagine, the fun and excitement of Red Bull. 1,000 space hospitality unit in Monaco and Miami, 20 show runs a year, 1 million fan database. We have a partnership network that's worth 1.5 trillion in annual revenues, the largest in the sport. We're building our own engine. These are all things that we talk about when we're creating that proposition, and of course we dial some things up and some things down according to the brand's objectives. But I think the most measurable factors for us, these are the things that justify our value within the market. This is how we speak to the marketeers, how we engage with them, how we almost provide a sort of a scorecard, if you like, compared to our other teams. And we always feature very highly on that scorecard, of course, but there's other things that can't be measured that are also very important. And it's more about the things that we do as a team and sort of the ethos surrounding the team. And we call this sort of maverick ingenuity. So we create passion. We bring fans to the heart of the team. We're always going for the gaps, metaphorically speaking, always going for the gap, whether that be in business or whether that be by the track. And these things can't be measured. And I think this is important. My background's from Deloitte, a very staid business, very traditional business. And I always mention this to people, the last thing you want as a brand owner when you're purchasing a sponsorship and investing in that sponsorship is to sit down with your CEO, for a quiet silver service meal, ordering the duck en croûte with a sumac jus, listening to Chopin in the hospitality, while the most important clients that the CEO's entertaining there are looking over the fence thinking, I wish I was next door having fun with Red Bull. And that's happened plenty of times before. So there's this feeling that you can't commoditize and you can't put onto a spreadsheet and you can't necessarily present. But when you get to the track and you see that, it's very, very visible.
Do you need to be an enthusiast for motorsport, for Formula One, to do your job?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, we're the sort of the original outsiders within Formula One. So we actively encourage outsiders from Formula One, from outside of Formula One, to join the team. As I mentioned before, we're the only team who can really transcend the sport from a sense of jumping into the verticals of music and art and culture and fashion and lifestyle. And that's all part of the wider Red Bull halo. And we've also seen how difficult it is and how expensive it is for our competitors to try and be relevant outside of that world of Formula One. And they're trying very, very hard. So the diversity of experience and background is critical to us, really, to sort of maintain that individuality and ensure we don't become a blue version of our competitors, of the Mercedes, the Ferraris, the Alpines of this world. We don't want to just be a blue version of the team. So that's really sort of the ethos behind bringing people from different talent pools and alternative and talent pools into the team.
So how did you get your job? If somebody's watching and thinking, this looks like a really glamorous job, I'd like to be Nick Stocker, how do I go about it?
I've never met anyone who's said to me, I want to be Nick Stocker, if I'm honest. Not even my kids say that to me. But I guess the glamour side, I'll probably start with the glamour side first of all, because there's no doubt about it. It is a glamorous job. There are elements of the job which you sometimes find yourself in and you think, how did I get here? How am I in the room with these people? But I guess it depends on who you ask. Like everyone, all those glamorous occasions that you see on TV, they're very much backed up by months on end working in the office, people dedicating themselves at the weekend, sacrificing time with loved ones, so there's some huge sacrifices there. But I guess again contextually, if it was my wife answering that question when she's seen me on TV hobnobbing at the Red Bull Energy station with Post Malone and Bad Bunny, she tends to have very, very little sympathy for me when I tell her that I'm tired, or so it's tough. But the success of the team is earned, over the last 2 years has very much been earned. And you start to sort of forget about those 4 a.m. calls to Japan and getting up early and, putting the kids to bed and then then having to do another call afterwards. But so the glamour is very much, it's in the eye of the beholder to some extent. I think, how did I get into Formula One? I've always worked in sport. And I guess Formula One in many respects found me. I was asked one day if I wanted to apply for a job in Italy. I signed an NDA and it turned out that job was with obviously Ferrari. And the reason that I got into that was completely fortuitous. I was at an event, I was speaking on a panel about sponsorship, and I explained that when I work in Deloitte, it's a very difficult and highly political environment to work in. And someone at Ferrari said, brilliant, that's the sort of criteria that we need for someone to work with us. So that's my journey.
Right, that's brilliant. One of the great things is about this being recorded. I can just sort of take a moment to really enjoy that, just to absorb that comment. We've seen a lot of changes in Formula One over the last 5 years, the ownership of the sport, drive to survive, and so on. Is that right? Commercially speaking, has the sport changed?
Yeah, I mean, the sport has certainly changed. I mean, we've been very lucky to be in that period of change within the sport as well, and that ongoing evolution of Formula One. Since Liberty purchased the sport, purchased the organisation of Formula One in 2017, there's been a lot of things that have changed. And there's a lot of things that have happened at the same time as well. So we've seen a group of exceptional drivers coming through, altogether young drivers, hungry in the sport, spearheaded, of course, by Max. We've seen 2 US Grand Prix, Las Vegas and Miami, which have been hugely successful and very well publicized. Red Bull have continued themselves to bring show runs around the world to 20 destinations a year, to those markets that don't have Grand Prix, even during during COVID. So there's been a huge change within the sport. And the results are speaking for themselves. I mean, it's been incredible. There's 1 billion fans now within the sport. There's been a 17% growth for 16 to 35-year-olds, outstripping the growth of football, which has never happened before. 40% growth in US TV audiences. And as I said before, more people watched the Abu Dhabi race last year for the championship decider than actually watched the Super Bowl. So it's changed the sport hugely. I guess, is it easier for us as a commercial team? Doors are opening. There's no doubt about it. But I think we've always found that with Red Bull, that the doors do open. There's always a certain amount of intrigue, and we are able to engage commercially. I think to your point around Drive to Survive, the one thing about Drive to Survive, it disappoints me, because when we enter a room to speak to a CEO, it just means that we can't show our sizzle film at the start of the meeting, because they think they know enough about Formula One in the first place. It's a blessing and it's a curse.
And it's Formula One's riding a wave at the moment. You know, business is cyclical. So I'm asking you to kind of look around the corner. Where do you think the sport's going to go over the next 2 or 3 years? What are the challenges you're going to face?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is not going to last forever. We're certainly in a huge growth period. I think the sport will continue to grow, absolutely. But I think it's, again, as I mentioned before, now it's really time to sort of ensure that huge success is inspiring the next generation of talent, of fans, of strategists, engineers, drivers, whoever that may be. I very much always talk about, the roaring 20s. This is our roaring 20s. This is the era of Formula One, which is our roaring 20s. And we have a responsibility right now as individuals and teams and governing bodies to make those decisions that are right, that are relevant, that are going to sort of, I guess, harness the positive direction that the sport is taking. So at the top of the list, for me personally, and I think as an organization, we talk about this a great deal, is around diversity, around sustainability. And they're two topics that we can't shy away from if the sport is to continue to grow. So we're making great strides there. There's always more to do, of course, but I think we really need to use this booming period in the roaring 20s to ensure that we don't have a Great Depression in the 30s.
When we look at your car, some great brands, you've mentioned Oracle and others already, fantastic, well-known global brands. It doesn't seem to be much space left on the car. So is one of your challenges that you've done such a good job that, or does that mean you can just lie back now? You've sold all the inventory and Christian can give you the rest of the year off?
I think it's unlikely Christian would give me the rest of the year off. But you're right. We are reaching a point where we are having to diversify our offering as a team, and that's challenging us as well. And I think what we don't want to do is we don't want to simply do a copy and paste and move into other series. For us, that doesn't make sense. We're growing as a technology business. We have a huge technology campus, which is undergoing a huge modernization program at the moment. We have Red Bull Advanced Technologies, which is a consulting business that we use using the expertise of Formula One to create more revenues and engagements with brands. And of course, we're building our own engine. We're only the second team aside from Ferrari, the OEM, who've been in the sport the longest, to have all of the major components of creating a Formula One car under one roof. So there's a whole host of opportunities for brands, whether they be consumer brands or tech brands, to work with us. And I think it's certainly a badge of honor when we go to the track and have a full car full of sponsors. Max the other day, he was set to wear the black armband, obviously, to commemorate Queen Elizabeth II's passing. But he was conscious because he couldn't find a spot which would cover a sponsor. And it's a nice challenge to have, of course, under sort of, I guess, reasonably tragic circumstances. But I think the point is, it's a badge of honor for us to go to the track and to have those powerhouses behind us sponsoring the team. And we choose them very, very carefully. So we're diversifying our products, and we're seeing what else there is out there that we can offer to our partners.
That's the team. We talk a lot about the team. Let's talk about you, Nick, and the things that excite you. What was your highlight moment in 2021?
I have to say it's been in Abu Dhabi. I was fortunate enough to be in the pit lane just as Max stepped out of the car and into the pit lane itself. That's a sort of sporting moment, and I've been very, very lucky and fortunate and enough to be in a whole host of incredible sporting situations that I never would have dreamt of, as I was younger. But for me, that sort of, even now, it brings goosebumps to my skin. It's an incredible moment. It's a moment in history, and it's something that I will always remember as a highlight of my career.
I thought you were going to say when you signed the big deal with a brand, or you saw your media numbers, or
that's also very exciting. But I think that's more of a that enables us to walk through the paddock with our heads held very, very high. But all of those things ladder up to ultimately, to being world champions. I think that's the one North Star that the entire factory in Milton Keynes all aim towards. So, selfishly, of course, there is an agenda for me as a commercial person to bring in some new brands and to keep the lights on in the factory. But ultimately, the one thing that we're all striving towards is to be world champions. So for me, that's the high watermark.
And is that because there's a clause in the contract that you get a big bonus from your partners when you win the championship?
I can't possibly comment on that at all, Matthew.
Nick, that's fantastic. Really good fun. Thank you.